Mara Ellison fired Terrence Holloway while he was already running toward the locked service door. "Holloway, stop." Her voice cut across loading dock 4, sharper than the backup beepers echoing between the trailers. Terrence heard her. He did not stop. One hand pressed the radio clipped to his orange safety vest while the other reached for the steel door at the end of the outbound lane. Behind him, 22 electric vans sat waiting for release, drivers checking watches, a city contract already sliding past its dispatch window. "Your station is unmanned," Mara called. "Go back now." Terrence pulled the handle. Locked. Then came the sound again. 3 dull impacts from the other side. Not pipes. Not machinery. Someone hitting metal. He leaned closer and caught the bitter smell of hot plastic. "There's somebody in there." Mara was 10 yards away now, phone in one hand, her expression held tight by a morning of delays. "Facilities is handling it. No alarm is sounding." "Terrence." She said his name once, low and final. "Return to your station or you're done." His fingers tightened around the door handle. For half a second he looked back at the dispatch cage, at the blinking red Q on the monitor, at the job that kept his schedule steady enough to pick Micah up 3 evenings a week without begging anyone for favors. Then another dar struck the door, weaker this time. Terrence dropped his radio onto the concrete, grabbed a yellow-wheeled chock from beside the bay, and drove its rubber edge against the stubborn latch. Mara stared at him. "You're terminated." The latch jumped. Terrence hit it again. Metal snapped loose. A wave of warm, chemical-smelling air rolled through the opening. He disappeared inside. Mara stood motionless for one beat before the dock manager rushed toward her. "Do we release the vans?" Her phone vibrated with the client's operations chief calling for the 3rd time. She looked at the open service door, then at the line of drivers. Hold them. It cost her the only thing she had been fighting all morning to protect: time. Inside the stairwell, Terrence found a woman sitting hard against the landing wall, one shoe missing, gray hair fallen loose across her face. A canvas tote lay halfway down the steps. She was awake, but one hand trembled against her ribs. "Can you stand?" he asked. "I already tried." Her answer came through clenched teeth. Above them, a scorched light fixture flickered once and died. Terrence crouched. "I'm carrying you." "Young man, you're going to hurt your back. Then you can complain about it outside." She gave him a startled look, almost offended enough to argue, but another faint crackle came from the wall conduit. That ended the discussion. Terrence lifted her carefully, one arm beneath her knees, the other braced across her back, and started down. By the time he pushed through the service door, Mara had ended the client call and was ordering a full dock shutdown. Then she saw Terrence step into the daylight carrying the woman from the stairwell. The phone lowered slowly from her ear. "Mom." Terrence stopped. The woman in his arms turned toward Mara, breathing hard. "Your employee heard me," Diane Klein said. That alarm didn't. Diane's words hung over the loading apron while a forklift alarm chirped somewhere beyond the parked vans. Terrence lowered her onto a folding chair an EMT had dragged from the security station, then stepped back as the medic wrapped a blood pressure cuff around her arm. Cold air pushed through the open dock doors, carrying diesel exhaust, and the scorched plastic smell still leaking from the stairwell. Mara stood 3 feet away, phone silent in her hand now. "You fired him?" Diane asked. Mara's jaw tightened. "Mom, let them check you." "That wasn't my question." Terrence bent to retrieve his dropped radio, its casing scratched from the concrete. He did not look at either woman. A supervisor approached with a tablet and stopped beside him. "HR needs your signature before you leave." Mara turned sharply. "Not now." Terrence finally looked at her. "You terminated me. They're processing it." The sentence landed without accusation, which somehow made it harder for Mara to answer. The supervisor handed him the tablet. On the screen, beneath his employee number, the reason had already been entered: abandonment of assigned operational post during critical dispatch window. Terrence read it once, pressed his thumb against the edge of the device, and signed. His phone buzzed before he could hand it back. "Lincoln Heights Elementary." He answered immediately. "This is Terrence." A woman's voice came through beneath the hiss of the dock heaters. Micah's after-school robotics session had been canceled because the instructor was sick. Pickup was now at 3:15 instead of 5:30. Terrence glanced at the clock above Bay 3. Losing this job did not just erase a paycheck. It erased the schedule he had spent 2 years building his life around. "I'll be there," he said. No hesitation. He ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. Mara had heard enough to understand. You have a son? 10. And you still left your station? Terrence's eyes moved to the open service door. Someone was trapped behind it. You could have called facilities. I did. He lifted the scratched radio. No response. Mara looked toward the dock manager. Was facilities on Channel 6? The man shifted his weight. They were covering a power issue on the second floor. Terrence added nothing. He did not need to. An EMT helped Diane stand, testing her balance while Mara reached automatically for her arm. Diane let her, but her attention stayed on Terrence. He asked if I could walk before he touched me. He tried the radio. He tried the door. Then he heard something sparking and carried me out. Mara's fingers tightened around her mother's sleeve. Mom, enough. No. You made your decision quickly. You can hear quickly too. A sharp metallic click came from the stairwell. A safety technician emerged carrying a handheld circuit tester and a blackened alarm module in a gloved hand. Ms. Ellison? Mara stepped toward him. What did you find? He held up the module. Its plastic housing was blistered along one edge. Intermittent fault on the stairwell circuit. Heat detector tripped twice, but the signal never reached the main panel. The dock seemed quieter around them. Mara looked at Terrence, then at the termination record still glowing on the supervisor's tablet. The technician continued. If he hadn't heard her, nobody out here would have known there was a problem. Terrence took off his safety vest, folded it once, and placed it on the dispatch counter. I have to pick up my son. Mara stepped into his path. Terrence. He stopped. Don't leave yet. For the first time that morning, the order in her voice was gone. Don't leave yet, Mara said again. But Terrence glanced at the clock above Bay 3 and shook his head. My son is waiting. The dock heaters rattled overhead while cold air rolled under the raised doors, carrying diesel fumes and the sharp electrical smell still clinging to the service stairwell. Mara looked from Terrence to the blistered alarm module in the technician's hand. Behind her, 22 vans remained motionless, their white roofs catching the hard noon light. Every minute of delay turning into money Harbor Line could not afford to lose. Ms. Ellison. The dock manager approached with a radio pressed to his chest. Client wants an answer. We can reroute the drivers around the stairwell and release in 10 minutes. Mara stared at the open steel door. Has the entire alarm circuit been tested? Not yet. Then nothing moves. The manager lowered the radio. The contract penalty starts at noon. I know what time it is. If we miss this window, nothing moves. Her second answer was quieter and final. Terrence watched her for half a second. Whatever he expected from the woman who had fired him less than 15 minutes earlier, it had not been that. Mara turned to the safety technician. Shut down Dock 4, the adjacent corridor, and every device tied to that circuit. I want a full inspection before anyone goes back inside. The technician nodded and reached for his radio. Almost immediately, the loading floor changed. Engines shut off one by one. Drivers climbed down from their cabs. A conveyor stopped with a mechanical shutter, leaving the warehouse strangely hollow except for distant warning beeps and the hiss of compressed air. The client called again. Mara declined it. Diane, now sitting beneath a silver emergency blanket, watched her daughter with a look Mara refused to meet. You should know something, Diane said. Mara crouched beside her. Mom, we can talk after they take you home. Terrence told me he had to get back to his station. Terrence, halfway toward the employee exit, stopped. Diane continued. I told him to leave me there. I said I could wait for someone else. Mara looked over her shoulder at him. And he heard that crackling inside the wall. Diane pulled the blanket tighter around herself. He said he wasn't leaving me alone in there just to protect his job. Terrence rubbed a thumb across the scrape on his radio casing. Mrs. Klein, Diane. Her voice still had the firmness of someone accustomed to classrooms obeying her. And I'm not making you smaller just because my daughter made a mistake. Mara stood. The words landed harder than the wind, pushing through the open bay. Before she could answer, two operations managers approached from the dispatch cage. One held a printed delay report. We're already 37 minutes behind, he said. Drivers are saying Holloway caused the shutdown. Terrence's face did not change. The circuit caused the shutdown. You forced the door and left your assigned post. Because someone was behind it. Mara looked at the report, then at Terrence, then at the line of stalled vans. For the first time, the cost of her original decision had spread beyond one termination form. Nobody puts his name on a delay report until safety finishes, she said. The manager frowned. The client is going to want responsibility assigned. Mara took the paper from his hand and folded it once. Then they can assign it to me. Her phone rang again. This time she answered. The client's operations chief did not bother with a greeting. Mara, if those vans aren't moving in 20 minutes, we're reviewing the entire Harborline contract. By 4:07 that afternoon, Terrence Holloway was sitting at his kitchen table with a termination packet open beside a bowl of macaroni Micah had barely touched. The apartment radiator clicked behind him, pushing dry heat into the room, while the faint smell of tomato sauce mixed with the industrial soap still clinging to Terrence's hands. Micah sat across from him assembling a small plastic gear train for his school showcase, snapping blue pieces together with careful pressure. This one keeps slipping, he said. Terrence reached across the table, rotated the axle a quarter turn, and pushed it back into place. Too much force makes it worse. His phone vibrated against the wood. Harborline Human Resources. Terrence watched it ring twice before answering. The representative spoke carefully. Because of the circumstances surrounding the incident, the company was offering immediate severance equal to 6 weeks of pay, continuation of health coverage through the end of the month, and a neutral employment reference. The catch came 30 seconds later. Accepting meant waiving his right to challenge the termination. Terrence looked at the stack of unopened utility mail near the refrigerator. 6 weeks mattered. So did the prescription receipt tucked beneath his wallet, the after-school fee due Friday, the grocery list written in Micah's blocky handwriting. And if I appeal? Terrence asked. A pause. Paper shifted on the other end. The severance would be suspended until the review concluded. No guaranteed timeline. No guaranteed reinstatement. Send me the appeal form. Across town, Mara Ellison stood alone in a conference room overlooking the darkened loading lanes. The glass felt cold beneath her fingertips. Below, Dock 4 remained partially closed. Yellow safety tape stretched across the service entrance while electricians worked beneath portable lights. Her mother had gone home with instructions to rest, but Diane's words had stayed behind. You made your decision quickly. Mara's laptop chimed. HR had forwarded Terrence's response. She expected anger, maybe a demand. Instead, his appeal contained 4 short paragraphs. He did not mention carrying Diane. He did not call himself a hero. He did not ask Mara to repay him for helping her mother. He challenged one thing, a policy that required employees to remain at assigned posts during critical dispatch operations without clearly defining emergency discretion when immediate safety was involved. Mara read the final paragraph twice. An employee should not have to calculate whether another person is in enough danger to justify losing his livelihood. Her phone buzzed with an update from the client. Contract review remained active. She ignored it and called HR. Why is his final pay being held? It isn't. Only the enhanced severance. Good. And the appeal? We can schedule review next week. Mara looked through the glass at the blackened service door below. Tomorrow morning. That's unusually fast. So was firing him. At Terrence's apartment, the appeal confirmation arrived while Micah tested the repaired gears. The little motor hummed, caught, then turned smoothly. Dad, are you coming to the showcase Friday? Terrence set the phone face down. Yes. Even if your job calls. Terrence's hand stopped beside the plate. Especially then. A second message appeared almost immediately. Appeal review, 9 a.m., Harborline Training Room B. Terrence read it, then opened the severance agreement one last time. 6 weeks of certainty sat one signature away. He picked up a pen, drew a clean line through the acceptance page, and wrote declined across it. At Harborline, Mara received the notification less than a minute later. Terrence Holloway was not asking her to give him his job back. He was forcing her to prove whether the rule she had used against him deserved to survive. At 8:58 the next morning, Terrence stepped into Training Room B with his coat still cold from the Baltimore wind and the faint smell of burnt coffee hanging over the long laminate table. Mara was already there, standing beside a wall monitor that displayed 3 lines from Harborline's attendance policy in black text. HR had placed a yellow legal pad at every seat, but Terrence ignored his and remained standing. Let's keep this simple, he said. Mara looked at him across the room. That would be nice. The safety manager began with the timeline. Terrence left his outbound station without relief coverage. That violated procedure. He attempted radio contact with facilities. No response. He heard repeated impacts behind the service door, detected an electrical odor, forced the damaged latch, found Diane inside, and carried her out. The alarm circuit had failed intermittently. Then HR read the policy aloud. Employees assigned to critical dispatch positions could not leave without supervisor authorization or confirmed relief. Terrence folded his arms. Read the emergency exception. Silence. The HVAC unit clicked overhead. Someone turned a page. There was no emergency exception. Mara's eyes stayed on the policy displayed behind Terrence, but her fingers tightened around the cap of her pen. What was he supposed to do? She asked. HR answered carefully. Technically, notify a supervisor and wait for direction. Terrence looked at Mara. Your mother was behind a locked door. No one spoke for several seconds. Then the training room door opened. Diane walked in wearing a soft brace beneath her cardigan, one hand resting on the doorframe before she crossed the room under her own power. Mara pushed back her chair. Mom, you didn't need to come. Yes, I did. Diane sat beside the HR representative and placed both palms flat on the table. I told him to leave me. Terrence lowered his eyes for a moment. Mrs. Klein, Diane. Her voice sharpened. You keep trying to protect everybody from the inconvenient part. She turned toward Mara. He said he had a job to get back to. Then he heard the wall crackle. I told him someone else would come. He looked at me and said, maybe. But I'm here now. That was the decision you fired him for. Mara did not answer. HR finally slid a document across the table. Based on the circumstances, termination can be rescinded effective immediately. Back pay for the missed shift would be restored. Terrence looked down at the paper. His employee number was already printed at the top. For the first time since he entered, Mara's shoulders loosened slightly. You can return today. Terrence did not touch the form. Under the same rule? Mara's expression changed. We can review the policy separately. Then this isn't fixed. He pushed the paper back across the table with 2 fingers. You know what happened because the person trapped happened to be your mother. Next time it could be a driver, a visitor, somebody on night shift nobody knows by name. Mara stared at the unsigned reinstatement form. The room smelled suddenly more strongly of burnt coffee as the warmer clicked on behind them. What are you asking for? Terrence picked up his coat. A rule that doesn't make somebody choose between another person's safety and feeding their kid. Mara's phone vibrated against the table. She glanced at the screen. The city client had sent formal notice. Harborline had 48 hours to submit a corrective safety and staffing plan or face suspension of the contract. Mara looked from the deadline to Terrence. Then help me rewrite it. Terrence paused at the door. Change it first, he said. Then I'll decide whether I still work here. The city's corrective action form gave Mara Ellison exactly 6 lines to explain why Harborline's critical dispatch operation had failed. By 7:20 that evening, the headquarters had emptied enough that she could hear rain ticking against the tall warehouse windows and the low electrical hum of temporary work lights over Dock 4. On her screen, a draft prepared by operations waited beneath the blinking cursor. Employee departed assigned station without authorization, creating an operational disruption during a time-sensitive deployment. Mara read the sentence twice. It was technically defensible. It was also the version that protected Harborline, protected the contract, and turned Terrence Holloway into the cause of a shutdown that had begun with a failed alarm and a woman trapped behind a steel door. Her phone rang. The city's contract director. We need your incident narrative tonight, he said. If this was isolated employee noncompliance, say that. If it was systemic, we have a different problem. Mara looked through the glass wall toward the yellow tape still crossing the service stairwell. The smell of fresh-cut conduit and warm insulation drifted up from the electricians below. It was systemic, she said. Silence came through the phone. Mara placed her hand on the keyboard and deleted the prepared sentence. She wrote the sequence herself. Incomplete relief coverage, intermittent alarm failure, no defined emergency exception, supervisor termination issued before safety conditions were verified. Then she added one more line. Executive decision contributed to escalation of the incident. Mara, the contract director said, his voice lower now. You understand what you're putting in writing? She clicked submit. Yes. Across Baltimore, Terrence was tightening a loose wheel on Micah's robotics platform when his phone lit up with an email from Harborline. The small motor buzzed across the kitchen table, smelling faintly of heated plastic. until Micah caught it before it rolled into a glass of milk. Terrence opened the message expecting another HR form. Instead, Mara had copied him on the corrective filing. He read the sentence about her own decision 3 times. Micah leaned over. Good news. Terrence locked the screen. Not yet. The next morning, Mara called him while standing on the concrete edge of Dock 4. Forklift tires squeaked against the polished floor behind her, and cold harbor air pressed through the half-open bay. The city isn't suspending us, she said. But they want a frontline emergency coverage procedure before the contract review tomorrow. Terrence was quiet. And you're calling the man you fired to write it? I'm calling the person who found the hole in the rule by getting punished for it. That earned another pause. I'll come in as a paid consultant for the review, Terrence said. Not as an employee. Mara's grip shifted on the phone. Fine. And I'm not standing in front of cameras. No newsletter. No story about the CEO's mother being rescued by the heroic worker. I wasn't planning one. Good. Because this can't become special treatment for me. The next person needs the same protection even if nobody important is behind the door. Mara watched an electrician test the repaired alarm. A hard electronic tone ripped through the dock, sharp enough to make 3 nearby workers turn their heads. This time, everyone heard it. Come in at 1, she said. Bring whatever you think the policy is missing. Terrence looked across his kitchen at Micah's finished machine turning steadily on its repaired axle. I'll bring the people who actually have to work under it. Mara glanced toward the dispatch cage where she had ended his job less than 48 hours earlier. Then bring them. At 1:03 p.m., Terrence walked back onto Dock 4 without a Harbor Line badge clipped to his coat. This time, Mara was waiting beside a folding table set directly on the warehouse floor, not upstairs behind glass. The repaired alarm panel glowed green on the concrete wall, and the air carried the mixed smell of cardboard, machine oil, and cold harbor wind slipping beneath the bay doors. 4 hourly employees stood around the table with radios, route sheets, and a printed copy of the rule that had cost Terrence his job. Show me where it breaks, Mara said. Terrence picked up a marker. It breaks before the emergency. He drew 3 boxes on a whiteboard, a signpost, relief employee, supervisor. Right now, if somebody has to move, the system waits for permission. That works until the person giving permission is somewhere else. A forklift operator tapped the second box. Half the night shift doesn't even have designated relief. Mara looked toward the operations manager. Then we create it. For the next 2 hours, they tested the problem instead of discussing it. One dispatcher left the cage after calling an emergency code over the radio. A backup employee crossed from Bay 2 and took the station in 43 seconds. Too slow. They changed the radio phrase. Tried again. 26 seconds. Then Terrence deliberately walked toward the service stairwell while another worker triggered the new coverage call. This time, no supervisor had to approve the first safety response. The station remained staffed. Mara watched the exchange from beside the yellow line, taking notes while the repaired alarm emitted a brief electronic chirp during a systems test. Again, she said. By 4:20, the whiteboard was covered with arrows and crossed out instructions. Terrence checked the time. His hand stopped over the marker. I need to go. One of the managers glanced at the unfinished procedure. We're close. Another 30 minutes. Terrence put the cap on the marker. Micah's robotics showcase starts at 5:30. The manager opened his mouth, but Mara spoke first. Then we stop. Terrence looked at her. The city walkthrough is tomorrow morning. I know. She gathered the loose pages herself. And if this only works because everybody stays late, then it doesn't work. No one argued after that. Terrence pulled on his coat and headed toward the employee exit, passing the same dispatch cage he had left under entirely different circumstances 2 days earlier. Behind him, Mara shut off the monitor rather than calling everyone back to the table. At 6:05, she sat across from Diane in a small neighborhood restaurant near Federal Hill, warm light reflecting off water glasses while silverware clicked softly around them. Diane looked at her daughter's phone lying face down beside the bread plate. You're not answering that? It had vibrated twice. Mara tore a piece of bread and set it down untouched. Not tonight. Diane studied her for a moment, then pushed the basket closer. Across town, Terrence stood in a school gym that smelled of floor wax and hot extension cords while Micah's small machine rolled between taped lines on a demonstration course. When it completed the turn without slipping, Micah looked into the folding chair crowd until he found his father. Terrence raised one thumb. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Mara. Procedure passed internal test. City walkthrough. 8 a.m. tomorrow decides the contract. Terrence looked back at Micah instead of answering immediately. For one evening, Harborline could wait. But by morning, the rule written because Mara fired him would have to survive the same kind of pressure that had broken the old one. At 8:02 the next morning, Terrence stood beside Mara on dock, while a city compliance team walked the yellow line where he had dropped his radio 3 days earlier. The bay doors were open 6 inches, enough for cold air off the harbor to slide across the concrete and carry the smell of diesel, wet pavement, and fresh electrical insulation from the repaired stairwell. Terrence wore his own dark work jacket, not a Harborline vest. Mara noticed it and said nothing. The contract director stopped beneath the new alarm panel and looked from the printed emergency procedure in his hand to the dispatch cage 20 yards away. "Run it." Mara nodded to an employee inside the cage. A radio call sounded. "Safety response, Dock 4 stairwell." One dispatcher moved toward the service door while a designated relief worker crossed from Bay 2 and took the empty station. 21 seconds. No supervisor approval. No abandoned console. No hesitation over whether responding to danger would become a disciplinary offense. The alarm test followed, a hard electronic tone cutting through the warehouse until conversation stopped. Green indicators lit across the main panel. The contract director checked his watch. Again, they ran it twice more. 24 seconds. Then 19. On the third test, he lowered his clipboard. Who was responsible for the original failure? An operations manager shifted beside Mara. She could have pointed to the defective circuit. She could have said Terrence violated policy. She could have buried the ugliest part beneath technical language and still told something close to the truth. Instead, Mara stepped forward. The alarm failed. Our relief coverage was incomplete. Our policy gave employees no clear emergency discretion. She paused, then looked directly at the man holding Harborline's contract in his hands. And I terminated Mr. Holloway before I verified why he left his post. Terrence turned slightly toward her. Around them, forklift tires hissed over polished concrete, and the wind rattled a loose strip of plastic sheeting near the repair area. The contract director looked at Terrence. "Would you agree with that assessment?" Terrence could feel every manager on the dock waiting for his answer. "I'd say the problem was bigger than one decision." Mara's eye stayed on him. A rule failed before Ms. Ellison did. The difference is she had the authority to keep pretending it worked. The director raised an eyebrow. And did she? Terrence looked toward the new relief chart clipped beside the dispatch station. No, there was no applause. No dramatic silence manufactured for him. Just the sound of another van starting outside and Mara releasing a breath through her nose. The contract director closed his folder. Harborline would keep the contract, subject to 30 and 90-day safety audits. The corrective procedure would remain mandatory during the review period. Mara nodded once. Understood. 40 minutes later, in the same training room B where Terrence had refused reinstatement, HR placed 2 documents in front of him. The termination had been formally removed from his record. His lost wages would be restored. Beside those papers sat a new return-to-work agreement. Mara remained standing across the table rather than pushing it toward him. No special title, she said. No publicity. Same position, same pay scale, with the revised emergency protections applying to everyone. Terrence read every page. Then he reached the signature line and stopped. Mara's fingers tightened once around the back of the empty chair. What's missing? He looked up at the woman who had once ended his job with a sentence. My schedule protections are still manager discretion. Mara glanced at the unsigned agreement. Terrence slid it back across the table. This time, Mara was the one waiting for his decision. Mara pulled the return-to-work agreement back toward herself and read the scheduling clause again while the ventilation system whispered above training room B and pale morning light stretched across the scratched laminate table. What do you want changed? She asked. Terrence rested both hands on the chair in front of him. Not something just for me. He pointed to the paragraph. If childcare, medical appointments, or documented family responsibilities are approved in an employee's standing schedule, a supervisor shouldn't be able to erase them because the dock gets busy. Mara looked at him. Operations will push back. Then they push back. Terrence's voice stayed level. I spent years building a schedule that lets me keep my word to my son. I'm not coming back if that promise depends on who happens to be managing Tuesday afternoon. For several seconds, only the distant thump of pallet jacks came through the wall. Then Mara picked up a pen. She crossed out manager discretion. By noon, HR had replaced it with a company-wide scheduling standard requiring documented recurring family obligations to be honored except during defined emergencies, with coverage planned in advance rather than demanded from the employee at the last minute. Terrence read the revised language twice. Mara did not rush him. Finally, he signed. His back pay was restored. The termination disappeared from his record. No promotion appeared beside his name. No special bonus. No photograph for a company newsletter. He returned to Harbor Line as an outbound logistics coordinator under rules that now protected the next worker as much as they protected him. 3 weeks later, Dock 4 sounded different. At 4:42 p.m., the repaired alarm released a hard electronic pulse through the warehouse. Radios answered almost immediately. A dispatcher called the safety code. A relief worker stepped into the cage, and another employee moved toward the service stairwell without waiting for permission. 20 seconds. Mara stood beside the yellow line with Diane, who was back on her feet and wearing the same stubborn expression she had carried into Training Room B. The steel door opened cleanly. No smoke. No trapped visitor. Just a scheduled test working exactly as it was supposed to. Diane glanced at her daughter. You finally fixed the door. Mara watched Terrence across the dock. The door was the easy part. A clock above Bay 3 clicked to 4:45. Terrence removed his safety vest, hung his radio in its charging cradle, and reached for his coat. Months earlier, that movement would have looked like a worker leaving while work remained unfinished. Now a relief coordinator stepped into his station before Terrence even turned away. Mara walked toward the service exit with Diane beside her. Terrence met them there, one hand already on the push bar. Micah, Mara asked. Basketball practice. Starts at 5:30? 5:15. Mara checked the wall clock. Then why are you still standing here? Terrence gave her the smallest hint of a smile and pushed the door open. Cold harbor air swept inside, carrying salt, traffic noise, and the distant cry of gulls. Diane stepped through first. Mara held the door while Terrence buttoned his coat and crossed the yellow line where she had once ended his job for choosing a person over a procedure. This time she watched him leave and said, "Don't be late." Terrence kept walking toward his son, and Mara finally understood that good leadership was not knowing how to keep people at work, it was knowing when they had every right to go home.